Trapped between life and death, the haunting tale of Owl Creek Bridge. The fateful event in our tale unfolds amidst the turbulent era of the American Civil War in the 1860s, a fierce and bloody conflict between the Northern Union states and the Southern Confederate States. In this charged atmosphere of war and division, a tragic episode occurs on the isolated and foreboding Owl Creek Bridge. A group of determined Northern soldiers has captured a defiant Southern farm owner, accusing him of sabotaging their military operations by attempting to obstruct Northern troop movements across the critical river crossing. His punishment is swift and merciless: death by hanging. In the fleeting moments before the noose tightens around his neck, the condemned man's mind slips into a desperate escape. His reality fractures, giving way to vivid, imagined freedom. The entire unfolding narrative becomes a vivid manifestation of the prisoner's deepest yearning, an escape born from the fierce will to live in the final seconds before death claims him. And now we present this haunting tale, brought to life by Shep O'Neill. Narrator: a solitary man stood silently upon the rugged wooden planks of a remote railroad bridge deep in the heart of Alabama, gazing down into the swift, churning waters of the Owl Creek River far below. His wrists were tightly bound behind his back, the coarse rope biting into his skin. Around his neck hung a sturdy noose, the thick rope stretched taut and securely fastened to a heavy timber beam above. The rope seemed almost alive, waiting with cold inevitability to fulfill its grim purpose. Nearby, 3 grim-faced Northern soldiers, hardened by war, stood as motionless as statues, their eyes fixed on the captive. Their rigid stance mirrored the silent tension hanging thick in the humid air. They awaited the final command from their captain, the dreaded order that would send the condemned man to his death. Every detail was meticulously prepared. Every soldier was in position. The prisoner, pale but composed, stood resolutely, his face a mask of suppressed emotion. His piercing eyes remained uncovered, allowing him one last, unfiltered glimpse of the world he was about to leave forever. Slowly, his gaze lowered, following the rough lines of the wooden bridge until it reached the shimmering, restless waters far below. A deep breath shuddered through his chest as he closed his weary eyes, shutting out the harsh reality of his fate. In the engulfing darkness behind his closed lids, he sought refuge in the comforting images of his beloved wife and innocent children. He yearned to fix their faces firmly in his mind, to carry their memory with him into the abyss. But even in this sacred mental sanctuary, he found no peace. A sound began to echo faintly in his ears, distant, uncertain, almost imperceptible. At first it was a gentle murmur, a soft, rhythmic pulse that seemed harmless. Yet with each passing second, the sound grew louder, more insistent, more invasive. The persistent noise swelled into a deafening roar, crashing into his mind like waves against unyielding rocks. The relentless pounding intensified, stabbing through his skull with merciless precision. His temples throbbed in agonizing rhythm with the harsh, unyielding sound. His mouth opened in a silent scream, but no words escaped his parched throat. Suddenly, with startling clarity, he recognized the source of the maddening sound. The swift and merciless current of the Owl Creek River, rushing fiercely beneath the bridge, echoing the unstoppable passage of time and fate. The prisoner's eyes flew open, locking onto the rushing waters of the Owl Creek River below. His mind surged with wild, desperate thoughts. If only I could free my hands, he thought intensely. I could pull off this rope and jump into the river. The water would hide me from their guns. I could swim beneath the surface, escape their sight, and reach the far bank. He pictured himself emerging on the other side, disappearing into the thick forest that stretched for miles. The dense woods would shield him as he raced toward home, far beyond the soldier's reach. His heart ached at the thought of his wife and children waiting there, safe and unaware of the danger he faced. I could be with them again, safe, free. But even as hope flared in his mind, reality struck with merciless precision. The captain raised his hand, giving the final order. A soldier stepped forward, his face expressionless, hardened by duty. With practiced efficiency, he adjusted the rope, making it secure. Then, with one swift motion, he released the trapdoor. The prisoner plunged downward. For a moment, there was only emptiness, dark and endless. Then came a sudden, crushing force at his neck. He felt an overwhelming pressure, cutting off his breath and sending sharp pains through his body. His senses blurred under the shock, leaving only the sharp awareness of his struggle. Amid the confusion, a loud splash pierced the stillness. It echoed through the air like a distant thunderclap. Coldness surrounded him, shocking his mind back to clarity. He realized with sudden hope that he was in the water. "The rope must have broken. I'm still alive." But reality remained harsh. His hands were still bound, and the rope still clung to his neck, heavy and unforgiving. A strange, bitter thought flashed through his mind. How strange to be trapped like this, caught between two fates. Then something fierce awoke within him, the instinct to survive. His body twisted and strained, driven by sheer will. His fingers, numb yet determined, fought against the ropes. Desperation gave him strength he didn't know he had. With a final surge of effort, his fingers found the rope around his neck and tore it loose. At that moment, an overwhelming surge of pain consumed him, sharper and more intense than anything he had ever felt before. His chest burned, and his body screamed in protest. For an instant, a strange, irrational thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the rope was better than this? But his survival instinct quickly overpowered the fleeting notion. His bound hands instinctively thrashed against the cold water, forcing him upward. His head broke the river's surface, and blinding sunlight seared his eyes, making him squint in discomfort. His mouth opened wide, gasping for air. His starved lungs greedily pulled in the cool oxygen, but the rush of air was almost too much, a painful relief. He exhaled with a choking cry, forcing out the breath that burned inside him. Suddenly, clarity returned. His senses sharpened beyond anything he'd ever experienced. He heard the faint hum of insects' wings slicing through the air, the gentle ripple of fish moving beneath the water, and the rustling of leaves on distant trees. Every detail of the world around him stood out in stark relief, sharp and vivid. He could see the intricate veins on each leaf lining the riverbank, their delicate patterns etched clearly in the bright sunlight. Then his eyes locked onto the bridge. He saw the soldiers and their commanding officers standing like dark, imposing figures against the sky. Their distant shouts reached his ears, distorted by the wind and water. They pointed at him with frantic urgency. Their faces seemed almost monstrous, twisted by determination and rage. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the air. Gunfire. He barely had time to register the sound before something splashed violently into the water near his head. Another shot rang out, and he saw one of the soldiers taking aim with cold precision. Realizing the deadly danger, he knew he had to reach the cover of the forest. He heard the commanding officer shout more orders, urging the men to fire again. Without hesitation, the prisoner plunged beneath the water's surface, diving as deeply as his body would allow. The muffled roar of the river filled his ears, blending with the echo of distant gunshots above. He surfaced again, gasping for air, just as more bullets struck the water around him. Some grazed his face and hands, stinging like burning lashes. One even slipped into the top of his shirt, searing his back with its lingering heat before sliding away into the depths. Despite the danger, he noticed with growing hope that the current had carried him farther from the bridge. The soldiers were now smaller figures in the distance. Gritting his teeth, he summoned all his strength and began swimming with powerful, determined strokes, his eyes fixed on the distant line of trees that promised safety and freedom. As he swam desperately, the soldiers continued firing their rifles, and soon after, the thunderous boom of a cannon shook the air. The river exploded with violent splashes, but miraculously, none of the shots found their mark. He pushed forward with renewed determination, battling the relentless current. Then, without warning, he felt himself pulled into a powerful whirlpool. The swirling water gripped him like an unyielding hand, spinning him around in dizzying circles. Panic seized his heart as he thought, "This must be the end." Just as suddenly as it had captured him, the whirlpool released its grip and flung him toward the shore. He tumbled onto the solid ground, gasping and trembling. With overwhelming relief, he pressed his lips to the earth beneath him, savoring its firm, unmoving reality. The air shimmered with a soft pink glow, and the wind sang gently through the trees, creating a serene, otherworldly melody. He longed to rest there, to stay in this peaceful place forever. But his peace was short-lived. Another cannon blast shattered the stillness, and bullets hissed above his head. Driven by survival, he staggered to his feet and sprinted toward the forest, its towering trees offering the only promise of refuge. At last, he stumbled upon a wide, straight road cutting through the dense woods. Strangely, the road seemed deserted, untouched by human life. There were no farms or homes, only dark, towering trees casting long shadows across the path. As he pressed on, strange, haunting whispers seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. Some voices sounded almost familiar, while others spoke in languages he could not understand. His senses blurred, and a deep ache pulsed in his neck, sharp and persistent. When he reached up to touch it, his neck felt swollen and sore. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, making it nearly impossible to close them. His feet moved, but he could no longer feel the rough road beneath them. Caught in a strange, dreamlike state, he wandered forward, half conscious, half lost in a waking dream. Then through the haze of exhaustion and confusion, he saw his home, the familiar welcoming sight that filled him with indescribable joy. His beloved wife appeared at the doorway, radiant and full of life. She rushed toward him, arms wide open, her face shining with love and relief. At last, home, he thought, overwhelmed with emotion. He stretched out his arms to embrace her. In that instant, a searing, unbearable pain exploded in the back of his neck. Blinding white light consumed his vision, followed by a deafening roar, like the sound of a distant cannon. And then, nothing. Silence. Darkness. Back at the Owl Creek Bridge, the prisoner's lifeless body hung motionless at the end of a rope, gently swaying from side to side beneath the wooden beams. His escape had been only a final, fleeting vision, the last dream of a man at the edge of eternity.